How long do you think it takes to have a criminal case finalised in your local courthouse? Well, unless you've been through the court system in recent years, the answer might really shock you. The wait times to have a matter finalised have almost doubled in some cases since COVID-19 started, and it's having a really big impact on lots of people here on the coast. ABC Central Coast reporter Kira Proust spends quite a bit of time in court. Not that she's done anything wrong. She's caught reporting. She's got a clean record, I hope, and is here with me this morning to chat about these delays. Good morning, Kira. Thanks for having a chat. How long are we talking here? And this must be causing great distress for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I do spend quite a bit of time in court, not for not for anything bad, for reporting on in terms of news, but I cover a whole range of matters from local to district courts and sometimes even in the Supreme Court. And every time I've been in court recently, I've just been hearing more and more about delays and pushing back court dates because of the backlog, which really has been caused during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I went to one of our local criminal lawyers, Manny Conditsis, to ask about, what he's seeing in terms of these delays and what the experience he and his colleagues have had. And he's told me that they are worse in the district court, which of course deals with the more serious matters. Some matters that people have pleaded guilty to in the district court, which of course speeds up that court process, have gone from between 6 to 12 months to finalise. That was before COVID-19, and now they could be taking anywhere from 10 to 24 months to finalise in our district courts if they've pleaded guilty. So some huge waits there, and they get bigger and bigger and longer the more complex the matters become. And so for some of the trials where a person's pleaded not guilty, it could have taken between 18 to 24 months before COVID. And now for some of the trials that are 2 weeks or longer, that can now be taking up to 36 months to actually finalise from start to finish, according to the lawyer I spoke to. So just mind-boggling.
Oh, that's terrible.
Frames.
So if that person doesn't get bail, because obviously there's the presumption of innocence, they're innocent until proven otherwise, they could be in jail for 36 months waiting in custody. Can that happen? I mean, what's the situation there? That's very unfair if they're not guilty.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these delays are impacting lots of people. Of course, the people who are in custody and have been refused bail, unable to get bail, so are sitting in jail waiting for these court cases to wrap up. So, of course, they're majorly impacted, but as well their family, their friends, the alleged victims in these matters who are also having to wait for the outcome. So really the impact is huge when you think of one person and all of their connections, and also, of course, on the court and all the people in court as well. But yeah, I spoke to lawyer Manny Conditsis about this, and here's some of what he had to say.
We have to give serious consideration, if we're going to refuse a person bail, how long the person will be sitting in a prison cell awaiting for his or her hearing or trial. And with the current delays, most people would accept that, generally speaking, sitting in prison on remand, incarcerated without a trial for 12 months, let alone 18 months, 2 years or 3 years, is unacceptable. Then you have the cost factor, because the longer that the matter goes on, generally speaking, you have more court appearances, more court mentions, more issues arise in relation to the parties having disagreement, and therefore legal argument will arise for which a judge has to resolve. And clearly, the longer the matter goes on, the greater the cost to the client. One has to also recognise that for alleged victims, complainants, there is an issue there for them as well, because from their perspective, they want justice, they've got to wait as well. I have a current release application on foot today, a very serious matter, and in that matter, we're waiting for the judgment. We've made our submissions on bail, and the accused being released, he's been in custody for 2 to 3 weeks, and the reality is, if he doesn't get bail, then that person will very easily be in custody for 2 to 3 years before his matter comes to trial. That's unsatisfactory.
That's local criminal lawyer and advocate Manny Conditsis. And we're talking about court delays today at ABC Central Coast with ABC Central Coast. Often court reporter Kira Proust, who does a lot of other things as well, online reporting and so on and so forth, but spends a lot of time in the courthouse, following these stories for our listeners. What's being looked at to address this issue? I mean, it's really getting out of control, the time people are waiting.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously it's actually been a few years now since COVID-19 began. So you'd think this is something that those in charge would be looking at as a kind of priority to try and speed up this process with those huge backlogs. But Mr. Conditsis told me that, the small measures that have been implemented in that time don't really seem to have worked from his point of view and his experience. But yeah, this is what he told me about what he'd like to see done to try and address this issue.
Hopefully our parliamentarians and those involved in the criminal justice system don't put it in the too hard basket. Some considerations would be these. One, for example, instead of offering the current inverted commas discount for a reduction on sentence for a person to plead guilty rather than to proceeding to trial, there could be a period where for a period of time the legislature says, well, look, if you plead guilty to an offence, instead of your discount being statistically 25%, which it currently is, we'll make it 30% or 35% or some figure to more motivate an individual to plead guilty to a particular offence now rather than on the prior statistic of 25%. So that could be one factor. Streamlining the actual trial process could also be considered.
What about resources? Do you think that's something that needs to be bolstered in terms of whether we need more physical space to hold proceedings in, or we need more magistrates or judges? What do you think about that in terms of resources and whether that would help?
In a word, yes, it would help. And in my view, and in the view of many of my colleagues, not enough funds is being poured into the criminal justice system, and particularly with a view to reducing the current backlogs. There are a whole range of issues that have the effect of contributing to the backlog, whether it relates to the availability of interpreters, whether it relates to the availability of actual courthouses to hold the matters. The more courthouses, then you need more magistrates, you need more judges. So, in my view, a significant amount of funding could be added, which would have a significant impact upon the reduction of the backlog. Now, that won't happen overnight. It might take 3 to 6 months, may take a bit longer for it to take effect. But if you do nothing, nothing will happen.
Local criminal lawyer there and advocate Manny Conditsis talking about the delays in our court system. And before him, our reporter, Kira Proust as well. Kira, thank you so much for joining us. And obviously there's a problem here that is really causing a lot of grief for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll follow up with the politicians to see if there is anything being looked at further down the track as well to address this issue.